Okay, so this is where this class gets really fun for me. And so for those of you that took physiology for me, this shouldn't be too surprising. I came from a lab where we studied the heart and lungs at the University of Oregon. And so this is really kind of my jam. I'm excited for this. These next several weeks will be a lot of fun for me, and hopefully you enjoy it as well. So we're going to start off by talking about control of heart rate. All right, and really there's just one thing. We're going to talk about intrinsic and extrinsic control. So most of what we're going to talk about isn't anything new. It's just a different way of framing it. Okay, so when it comes to the heart, there's intrinsic control and there's extrinsic control. So when you hear about intrinsic, just think about stuff that's coming from within the heart that's going to control the heart rate. And this is occurring due to the pacemaker cells. Remember, pacemaker cells can generate their own action potentials. They don't need a signal from a nerve. Okay, they'll respond to a signal from a nerve, but they don't necessarily need it. So the SA node, which is the true pacemaker of the heart, will fire on its own without any input from the autonomic nervous system about 60 times a minute. And the SA node, its job is to tell the atria to do its job, to tell the atria to contract, and it also tells the AV node, do your job. Okay? And so then with the AV node, it tells the ventricles to contract. It's helped along with the bundle of His, and remember, these are each sets of pacemaker cells, and that bundle of His sends the signal from the AV node to each ventricle. Eventually, we get to the Purkinje fibers, which bring the signal down and around the apex of the heart back up. Okay, so really the signal goes like this. Okay, and at the same time, it's also going this way. All right, and so this allows. And so when the SA node fires, it also tells the atria to contract, just like those arrows are showing. But it sends a signal to the AV node down and around. That's the intrinsic control. It's going to do what it wants to do, or it can do what it wants to do. But then we've got the extrinsic control. And this is where we get into the autonomic nervous system specifically, so the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Now, as you're sitting here watching this video, odds are, unless you're at the gym watching this and working out, that the parasympathetic side is what's dominant as you're sitting there. Okay, the parasympathetic side is dominant at rest. Okay, the parasympathetic nervous system decreases heart rate. Heart rates can get in the 20s. Okay, I have a relatively low heart rate. I've never, as far as I know, been in the 20s or anything official. Lowest I've seen is 32. Part of that was just because I was on high oxygen for a study at U of O, but I've had it as low as 35, 36, just sitting there existing. Okay. Now, if we didn't have this parasympathetic activity, our heart rate would be normally around 100. Okay. And so if your heart rate's below 100, parasympathetic nervous system is what's controlling heart rate. On the other hand, you've got the sympathetic nervous system, and this increases heart rate, and depending on who you are and how young you are, your heart rate might get as high as 250, okay? And so this becomes the dominant branch of the nervous system with regards to heart rate when it's above 100. Okay, so if you're at 100, it's possible that you're not getting a lot of input from either branch of the nervous system. It's also important to remember it's not one or the other. Both of these work on a sliding scale, and neither of them are ever turned all the way off. And the final thing when it comes to extrinsic control is hormones, and this ties back into the autonomic nervous system. So the SNS, the nerves of the sympathetic nervous system, release norepinephrine directly onto the SA node. Now, this increases heart rate, which is what we're talking about, but it also increases stroke volume. Okay, and this allows that sympathetic nervous system response to last longer. On the flip side, the parasympathetic system releases acetylcholine, and all that does is it decreases heart rate. Really interesting to note that acetylcholine activates, excites muscle cells, skeletal muscle, but it actually inhibits or slows down pacemaker cells. And so that's the extrinsic and intrinsic control of heart rate.